This program was made possible by grants from the John and Diane Laxmi Family Charitable Fund, the Asfar and Maheen Malik Family Foundation, and the Missouri Asian American Youth Foundation.
I feel like probably a lot of our parents, a lot of people in the first generation immigrants, just felt that I can't afford to stop and think about how I feel.
Hi, I'm Aisha Sultan, and these are things we don't talk about. Rajesh is a 35-year-old software engineer. He immigrated to the United States seeking better career opportunities. He left behind a close-knit family, a familiar culture, and a strong social support system. He faced stressors related to adapting to a new country, felt a kind of culture shock, struggling with differences, language barriers, and adjusting to American norms. He also felt isolated and missed the warmth of family gatherings and festivals. He works in a demanding industry. That also gives him a lot of stress. At times, he's anxious and can't sleep well. The worst part might be that he's also having a bit of an identity crisis. He's not really sure where he belongs anymore. I'm joined by psychiatrist Dr. Angela Lin and Dr. Shahbaz Khan to help us learn more about what Rajesh is dealing with in this hypothetical scenario. Thank you both for joining me in this conversation. I know it's near and dear to all of our hearts because of our family experiences. So tell me a little bit about how common this is for immigrants or even children of immigrants.
Well, thank you, Aisha, for having me here. Excited. How common? I was looking at a study from NIH. What it said was that almost 50% of the immigrants, one member of that family, go through immigration trauma, and almost 13% of the whole family as a unit, and almost 24% of the young adults go through immigration trauma. So the numbers are pretty high.
Dr. Khan, what exactly is immigrant trauma?
Well, trauma that is associated with immigration. So let's talk a little bit about trauma so that then we can associate the two. Trauma is a deeply disturbing event that basically shatters your sense of security, overwhelms your coping skills. As a result, you're in a place that's unfamiliar, helpless.
Trauma is one of these terms where everyone thinks that you know it when you see it, but really there's different degrees of trauma, different kinds of trauma, especially for something like immigration, where you're often supposed to be happy about it. You made it out, you're the successful one, you're supporting your family. Oftentimes the person going through it doesn't necessarily view that as traumatic, but not only can the immigration, that acute period, be traumatic, just the experience of continuing to be an other in a new place can be re-traumatizing.
And what kind of impacts can that have on relationships, on a person's health in the short term and long term if they've experienced some kind of immigration trauma?
Mental health and physical health go hand in hand, right? So from physical to mental, mentally speaking, anxieties. You are in a place where nobody knows you, your identity. If I remember my own first day or first few days or nights, is that I did not know who knew me in this city where I was sleeping at night, because who I was, what was I doing, what was my purpose. So it is a very dissociating feeling you have. So it can lead to, if it is not addressed, it can lead to anxieties, depression, isolation, physical health issues, because if constantly you are in a state of turmoil, blood pressure issues, migraine, somatic issues, GI symptoms, chronically blood pressure issues, maybe I mentioned that before. So,
can you tell me a little bit about what your immigration story was like?
Being a physician, my father, he had already immigrated to United States, so he wanted me to come and practice here, while I wanted to be a surgeon. And I wanted to go to Europe for my specialty. But because of my father's desire, I moved over here. So I had family here. I had friends over here. Despite of that, coming over here, in the beginning, it's a mixed feeling. You have the excitement, you have that sense of adventure, learning. At the same time, you also want to know who you are. Are you grounded? Are you here? Are you present? People know me, who I am, what I do. So that is what you go through.
Yeah.
And how do you negotiate that? It, I think, leads to how you come out.
Yes. And can you tell me a little bit about your family's experience with immigration?
So my parents came to the U.S. For my father's education. He was doing a PhD program in electrical engineering in Iowa. They came to the U.S. with $300 between the two of them, no family in the U.S. pretty much at all. And they actually very early on, even when they still had debt, they were sending a lot of money back and putting my father's younger brother through his MBA program. They put the cost of that education on credit cards because they didn't have the money at that time. My brother and I were born in New Jersey, and then we grew up mostly in Texas. The place that we grew up at the time was probably around 90% white. My parents chose that area because of proximity to my father's job, but also because of a good school district over a not that far away neighborhood where we probably would have had more diverse neighbors and more people who looked like us.
Parts of both of your stories are so resonant with me. So my father was the first one in his family to come from Pakistan to the United States because he won a visa lottery, which was a thing back then in the 60s. And so he was the first one who came, like your parents, with a small amount of money in his pocket and the name of a few people in Chicago, even though my father was highly educated in Pakistan, who could get him a job well below his educational level because that's where he had to start up with. And that story was very familiar to me. That sort of, I came with nothing. I was able to, raise a family of 6 kids who are all thriving in this country, and eventually sponsor all his family members to come here to create a support network. What I never heard about until I was much older is what his own story was like when his family had to flee India during partition, a very violent and bloody time when Pakistan and India split into two, and people had to change borders in this chaotic, huge transfer of human beings. He was put on a train with his mother at the age of 2 with masses of people, and his family home was being taken over. His family was being threatened. He didn't know if he would see any of them again. Never talked about it. How common or uncommon is that?
I think the root I can identify in a way, being a male from Pakistan. There are certain expectations of you, especially if you are head of a family, in your father's case, because I'm from northern area, Pathan. So Pathans are not supposed to process and express. They're just supposed to deal with it and move, right? So we deal. We don't acknowledge, process, have a closure for those things. The architecture, the cultural architecture is such that it is almost suffocating. That because you are not supposed to feel or express those feelings. And so I think that is what, because the sense of security is a sense of control of the expression of the emotions.
Interesting.
And you want to impart that sense of security to your family, because you have to be the rock in a way, to your children, because basically I think you're dealing with fears and insecurities, right? And acknowledging them can lead to an identity crisis in some way. So you hold it together so that fear in your own way is not transferred.
Okay, so they're trying to protect you. My dad was trying to protect me, and he was trying to hold it together for himself to be strong for his family.
Yes.
Did your parents ever talk about their feelings or how they felt with their immigration process?
I eventually found out a lot of things about my parents' past that I hadn't known for a long time. I thought that their story was just they're from a small town, they did really well on college examinations, they went to Taipei, the capital city, went to college, did well in school, and came to the US. I found out later, visiting family in Taiwan, and my father's older sister casually mentioning offhand, like, oh yeah, this is where I used to go find your dad on the beach when he ran away because his father was an abusive alcoholic. And my dad would just run away and go to the beach and hide behind the rocks, and his sister would find him at some point. I found out later as well that my grandmother, my mother's mother, probably had bipolar disorder. And I had always been told, oh, she's anxious, you know, she takes medication for sleep. And literally a couple of months ago, my mom said, oh, you know, she was actually diagnosed with this thing, this term, in the past. And I said, that's mania, right? So now all those things about her thinking that people were poisoning her at her nursing home, that wasn't a dementia new thing. That was something that had happened in the past. And my mother had said before things like, how come in the past people didn't have depression? This is a new invention. This is because you have too much time on your hands. Everyone else is just trying to survive. But much later in retrospect, she said, you know, I felt like I couldn't afford to be anxious. I couldn't afford to be depressed because who else was going to do the things that were required? Who else was going to take care of her younger brother and send money to the family? Things like that. I feel like probably a lot of our parents, a lot of people in the first generation immigrants just felt that I can't afford to stop and think about how I feel. I can't afford to stop and think about what this is doing to my body because I just have to keep going.
Is it helpful for people who are older and perhaps they've had a few years or many years to establish themselves to try to then go back and revisit some of this? Or is that just, you should let sleeping dogs lie, don't go back to things that are painful? What would you say?
I mean, I'm a proponent. I mean, you have to. Right?
Why?
Because the thing is that if I don't like something and I put it on the side, it doesn't go away. It's just out of your sight. And if you keep piling up, it will come crashing down sooner or later. And the thing is that we think it is not happening, but it starts exhibiting in different areas. I mean, your irritability, mood, frustration, tolerance, lack of pleasure in things. So it does. It's just that particular feeling you are hiding from or you are putting on the side. So sooner or later, you have to. I always talk about my daughters, so I'll talk about my 5 daughters, right? So being a psychiatrist is an advantage and a disadvantage at times, right? And I make sure that I process and I talk and I explain. I tell my stories, right? Because they need to know who I am, where I am coming from. And basically, my decisions are not decisions. What is behind them? What is the reasoning? So hopefully there is no dead end. There is just processes and understanding.
You know, and you have the benefit of years of training to have the language and the ability to do that. Whereas if someone came with a totally different skill set, they were never given the tools of how to say how they feel or explain their thought process. It's just like, this is what my religion says, or this is what my family says, or this is what my culture says, and that's why we do these things. And Dr. Lin, I'm really struck by the fact that you're a psychiatrist, and you did not know until a few months ago about a significant psychiatric condition of one of your closest family members. I mean, how did you feel when you found that out?
Well, I felt like that made a lot more sense, honestly. There is probably a lot of mental illness on both sides of my family that just got dismissed as, oh, that's just how he acts, that's just how she acts, and as if these things were one-offs. But like Dr. Khan was saying, a lot of these things, just because you push it aside, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And that can be true for these pre-existing conditions and also for things that happen in a traumatic experience, like with immigration. Sometimes, actually, I would say quite often, the process of unpacking those things is uncomfortable for the person doing it. And I think that's where you get into the question of, is it worth it?
Yeah.
Because certainly it's possible for some people who have been doing okay for 20, 30, 40 years that going through that process is going to be acutely disruptive for weeks, months, years. There are certainly people who are going to say, it doesn't matter anymore, right?
Right.
I paid the price. My kids are going to be better. But I think that there is the risk, too, of perpetuating this kind of attitude of, I survived it, you should too.
I love that point because we can talk a little bit about the children of immigrants and recognizing that sometimes there's unspoken trauma that we can see. They miss their family. They don't know how to relate to us because they grew up in a totally different way, in a totally different culture. They might not understand the things that we want to do or why we want to do them. But I feel like I didn't have the language to approach my parents to talk about what they had been through or what they were feeling. And I didn't even know if it was respectful for me as a child to do. But now I feel like as an adult, I want to encourage them. I want to help them to be able to talk about it. Is that a conversation that you've been able to have with your parents at all?
It's a conversation I've had with my mother over the course of many years, starting from the conversation in high school where she said, well, depression is not a thing that people had in the past, which was very interesting because even at that point, I had gotten the idea, well, my grandmother certainly had had depressive periods where she was probably taking a lot of barbiturates just to sleep at night.
And so how did you approach those conversations with your mom? And why haven't you approached your father about conversations?
So I think the conversations with my mother happened naturally over time. Psychiatry and mental illness were always things that I was interested in, even in elementary school. My mom reminded me recently she had to sign like a permission slip for saying that I was mature enough as a 10-year-old to do a project on schizophrenia or something like that. It's been an evolving conversation as I've gone through education because of some of the choices that I've made. Right. My parents were not quite to the point of saying, oh, why don't you become a real doctor? Yeah. When I decided to go into psychiatry, but certainly I've had colleagues whose parents have said similar things. That conversation, I think, over time has evolved from mental illness exists, these are real things, to, oh yeah, and maybe this is something that was in our family. It's something that comes up naturally over time. I think my mother is naturally more introspective and has a better vocabulary for emotions than my father does. Mm-hmm. My father, actually, interestingly, the reason the conversation of depression doesn't exist came up in high school was because I had actually asked my mother if I could see a psychiatrist because I said that I was feeling depressed, I had an eating disorder. And she said, well, I think you just don't study enough because you have too much free time. And I was valedictorian in my high school, and she asked if I wanted to see a career counselor.
Oh my gosh.
My father, many years later, when he heard about that story, said, why didn't you ask me? Like, I would have taken you. And it just never even occurred to me because, again, this is one of those cultural things. You don't talk to the man of the family. You don't talk to your father about your feelings.
Right. That's so poignant that you would get that response when really as a young person, you're asking for help. You're asking for help. And it actually was during the pandemic when I ended up talking to a therapist on an unrelated issue because the news media was dealing with so much given what was happening in the country that I thought I should talk to a therapist to get some strategies to deal with my anxiety. And so I start this weekly conversation with someone who's phenomenal. And at one point she goes, do you feel ready to talk about some of the trauma from your childhood? I literally laughed and said, I don't have trauma. My parents loved me. They gave up everything for us. I had everything, food, water, love, shelter. And it took a long time for me to be able to say that, okay, maybe some of these things in my childhood I should talk about. Have you heard that or experienced that from your own practice?
A lot. What I have noticed in my practice that a lot of depression, anxiety, if you dig deep, there is so much trauma in there. personalities. Because going back to one thing that Lin said, interestingly, unpacking, these are the wounds that we band-aid and they get infected. So taking that band-aid off is not easy. It's going to be painful.
Right.
But unless you clean it up, wrap it up, it will not heal. So that's where we have to address those things. Coming back to what you said was that shame.
Yeah.
Our culture, at least the culture that I come from, shame and guilt is very prevalent. So as a result, having emotions, having feeling, having illnesses is shameful. That there is something wrong with me. I am bad, rather than something that I have.
Right. Or something that you can actually feel differently about. Like I thought it was normal to feel very anxious all the time because that's how I'd always felt. Or I thought it was normal to always feel under pressure.
Right.
But in this process of talking to someone and talking about, maybe I think that because of what I experienced growing up as the eldest child of eldest child of immigrants, that you can actually feel different.
Exactly. And you said anxiety. Whenever we generally talk about trauma, we always think about flashbacks, nightmares, intrusive thoughts. But trauma is not just that. Trauma is a whole spectrum, right? It can be anxiety, it can be lack of pleasure, it can be issues of trust, issues of building those relationships. So it exhibits itself in so many different ways that go unnoticed or unaddressed.
And with my father, I never realized this growing up, but he had a very short temper and we weren't sure what could set him off and make him really, really angry. So we kind of walked around eggshells. But now thinking about the circumstances in which he fled India, what they had to deal with in Pakistan, and then what he had to deal with again coming to America, all of that unresolved trauma, significant trauma that he never was even allowed to talk about or never felt like he was allowed to talk about. Of course you're going to get angry at little things. Where else are you going to channel that emotion?
Exactly. Because the thing is that we have trauma, but problem is that by not processing, by not having therapy or treatment for it, trauma has you. So you can have something, but when it engulfs you, you are still 20 years ago, you are still 30 years ago, right? So that tiger that was outside this door, that has been taken away by the animal control, in your mind is still out there. So you don't open that door, you don't go outside because the fear is real. You live in it. So the idea that trauma happened in the past lives with you every day. And it expresses every day.
Yeah, and you might not even recognize the way. Maybe you don't have the relationship you want with your kids or with your boss or with your coworkers or with your spouse, and it might be related to things that you never processed or dealt with.
Exactly. Like your father, he lost. So I wonder that is he always afraid of losing, right? So if you are afraid of losing, what do? You keep a distance, right? Engagement, love, expression, those things you don't do because you're anticipating a loss, because you never processed the loss.
Wow, that's so profound. Thank you guys so much for coming to talk about these issues that are really difficult for, I think, our families and people from our backgrounds to explore and talk about and to understand why it can be beneficial if we are willing to talk about the things that we don't talk about.
So that, and then once you come over here, you have left behind yourself, your culture, your family, your festivals, your everything, in a sense, and now you are adapting, or now you want to be welcomed in a new society.